What's up, WMSC? It's Terry back again with another interview with a friend we have not seen in about a year now, but now we are back to talk about all things Pride. I am here with Sammy from Sammy Rae and the Friends. Sammy, thank you so much for speaking with me today. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. I'm
Of
glad to be
course.
back.
Amazing and happy Pride.
Hey, thanks. Happy Pride, one and all.
Of course. How are you celebrating this year?
This is a pretty busy Pride month. We're getting ready for a couple really big shows. I've been watching some queer cinema, just hanging out and texting in with my LGBTQIA friends and seeing what other people are doing to hang and trying to educate myself a little more deeply.
Let's talk about how you started to identify as queer. What did that look like for you? How was that journey for you?
Great question. I knew that I was different from the time I was a kid. And as I started to get a little bit older, I didn't necessarily have the language around me or any queer role models or anyone around me to sort of help me put language to what I was feeling and how I felt who I felt I was. I went to an all-girls Catholic high school, so you can imagine that's a very like faith-driven environment, and I didn't necessarily feel very safe to, it's time for me to come out. But when I moved to New York when I was 18 or 19, suddenly I wasn't in that kind of small environment anymore, and I grew up in a very small town as well. And again, there weren't any queer folk that I knew of in my life. But when I got to New York, suddenly there was every sort of person, and it gave me every sort of permission to be everything I wanted to be. And it wasn't just about me feeling a little safer to be openly queer because there were openly queer folk around me. It was also, I wasn't the only like musician that I knew of. Everybody was a musician. Everybody, had an interesting sense of style. It wasn't just me. And it was a really important time for me because seeing so many people give themselves so many different types of permission, I realized that I could give myself that permission. I didn't really come out and start talking to my close friends and family about my identity until I was about 25, which is a little bit later than I would have liked to, kind of starting to stand in that. But at that point, I had, there were a good number of people following the band, and I felt like I was being looked up to by a lot of people, and I wanted to make sure that I was at this, like, right here, let's stop, and I'm going to give you my authentic self. And I was met with so much support from my friends and family, and it's the best decision I ever made was to start talking about who I was and how I'd been feeling for so long, and give myself that permission to just be myself
Right.
in every capacity. It's so important.
And it's such a beautiful thing to finally say, like, this is me. I don't really care what anybody else has to say. And you
Right.
said that you went to an all-girls Catholic school, and I kind of relate to that because I went to an all like a co-ed Catholic school, and it was really hard for me to also embrace my identity as queer. What was that experience like growing up in high school, being in that environment? Because I know what it's like, but for other people who don't really get it,
Well, it's tough. My understanding of queerness is so much deeper than, you know, romantic attraction and sexual orientation and gender identity. And those are definitely parts of the queer experience, right? But it's so much deeper than that. It's also about that sort of permission that you give yourself to move through the world authentically. And it's in how you present and how you dress and the company you keep and the sort of media you consume and the places that you go. While I was having a hard time at my all girls Catholic school because I did have crushes and I was experiencing attraction, and, I couldn't act on those things. And that was very kind of like blatantly stated to us, homosexuality is a sin. And we talked about it in health class. And that was really disheartening and painful because I was starting to realize that's me. That's that thing that
right.
I've been feeling forever. So that kind of took away that opportunity to figure out how I wanted to present and move through the world. So that was difficult. And when I got to college aged and I moved to New York, that was an enormous shift because suddenly nobody was telling me how to dress, what to wear, who to love, who to date, who to hang out with, what sort of like art and media to consume. The school wasn't telling me that, the church wasn't telling me that, and also my folks weren't telling me that because I was out of the house.
In that experience, did you ever struggle with any systems of faith, and like how did religion kind of play a role in that?
This is a very deep and emotional subject for me, and I don't mind going there, but I could just go and go and go there, so I'll try to keep it brief. I noticed that all the girls that were really well liked at my school by the staff and the sisters and their peers were the super duper Catholics, like super faith driven girls. So I had this realization where if I could just kind of be that really hard, um, I would win favor with the sisters and my friends, and maybe nobody would assume, or they would just sort of like, oh, not Sam. She's in the core team and she does the weekend retreats and all this different stuff. I think my mentality was turn my entire identity into Catholicism, because if I was that good enough, it made the fact that I was queer in the background not matter. And I'm grateful for that time. It taught me so much about myself. And more than anything, it taught me how to be a good leader and a good communicator. And in a weird way, when you flip it on its head, the biggest lesson I learned in that time period was how to advocate for myself.
So when you moved to New York, what were those emotions that you were feeling when you finally felt that I don't have to listen to anybody anymore?
I was very excited, but I had a lot to prove. I was the first person kind of anywhere in 3 generations in my family to leave my small town. It was where my mother's parents immigrated and settled. It was where my father's parents had always lived. It's where my parents met in high school. It's where they gave birth to my brother and I, and nobody really leaves that small town. And let alone nobody leaves that small town and moves to like the biggest, baddest, dangerousest city on the East Coast, which was New York, but that was me. I actually moved to the city to pursue an education in childhood development, early childhood education. I moved to New York and went to a college in the Bronx for 1 semester to get my teaching degree. But when I finally got to the city, I realized that I was, not just the most talented singer and like a songwriter from this small town, but that I was talented in the context of the New York City music scene. And I really had a chance with this thing. And I started to realize, like I really have what it takes to make this thing happen if I actually want to be a band leader and a songwriter in the city. So I left college, which my family was not thrilled about. And they've since come around, obviously. But I went originally with this guise of I'm going to leave this small town to go study to be a teacher. I didn't know in the back of my head, I'm going to leave school so I can be a musician. But I knew that if I was going to go get this degree anywhere, I had to go somewhere like New York City. I had to go somewhere bigger and louder with more experiences and more different sorts of people, because I was eager to see if I could go find my tribe.
So it's incredible that you took that step. And being that it's so taxing, like emotionally, like physically, who was a part of that support system that kind of got you through that transition period?
What a wonderful question. I have an aunt who I love very dearly, who was a confidant in this time period. And I was kind of calling her for support with things that I was afraid if I called my folks for support, I would get like, you have to come home, that's it. And in reality, I know that I wouldn't have, but I felt safer talking to my aunt about some of this stuff. And to be honest, one of the first people that I met and got close with when I moved to New York City was James Quinlan, who's the bassist for Sammy Rae and the Friends. He's one of the most wonderful straight white men on the planet, but that was the first friend that I made who wasn't somebody who came from the same crop as me and had a bigger worldview than me. And I really loved that about him. So in a weird way, that friendship was did a lot for helping me come out.
So being a queer artist in the industry, what have been the successes and challenges of trying to navigate the industry?
There were more so my being a woman than my being queer. But there were moments in the beginning when you like don't really know what you're doing. And I there's this one venue in New York that any musician will tell you they have had a terrible experience there. And the venue people literally didn't believe me when I said I was the headliner and didn't want to let me in. A deeply misogynistic place. And there are countless stories about this venue, but that's a big example. And there were little things like I would come into the venue and maybe the sound guy would ask a question to James and not me. or to like a male friend who was there and they were like, I don't know, she runs the show, talk to her. It's interesting on the topic of queerness because I almost feel like my queerness worked in my favor
Really?
when dealing with like male house personnel. I feel like that initial gut introduction, here's this girl who's in charge of this band and I'm just a girl, right? And then maybe they catch on from hanging out with me after an hour, or I change into what I'm going to wear on stage, or somehow they see me interacting with my band, or they catch this vibe that the band is not treating me like a sexual object. I'm not carrying myself like a sexual object. I'm carrying myself with like strength. I envision what this show is going to be like, and it's going to be great. And I think they would catch the vibe that I was not a viable prospect for them to hit on. And I was this other thing that was just here to be in charge. I think the only ways that being a queer band leader and queer business owner and all of that has affected us is there are certain places in the United States where it feels less safe to put on the show we put on and also walk around before the show the way that we want to walk around. And that's tough, but that is not just our industry. That's the way this country is. And I will say, all 50 states, every city and every state, no matter where we're playing, I never feel like that within the immediate vicinity of the venue because our audience is the bomb and they're so friendly and they're wonderful people and they create such safe space for each other, and their gratitude for us being in town is always so tangible and enormous. And we know that they're glad that we're there.
For someone who may be struggling with their identity somewhere out there in the world, what advice, what insight would you give to them right now?
It's tough to give this sort of advice because I want to say, come on out, you know, we got you. Like there's a whole community here waiting to support and love you. But I know that that's different for everybody, and that's not something that's a reality for a lot of people. The way that you make the world a better place is by being yourself. And the way that you set yourself up for a lot of failure and frustration and disappointment is if you waste too much energy trying to be something that you're not, or trying to be something that you think that you have to be. Because if you're spending all this energy to try to be something else that you're not, you're going to wake up every day frustrated because you failed. You're going to fail every single day, right? So why would you sign up for that? Why would you sign up to fail every single day and never get it right? Because the only thing you can do right without even trying is be yourself. And again, I'll say it that way, right? I'll say you got to stop trying to be other people and you got to get to a place where you can be yourself as soon as you possibly can. For as many years of your life on this earth as you can, you should be standing in your authentic self. I'll say that. And if part of that is you coming out and being queer and or falling somewhere under the LGBTQIA umbrella, and you feel that you cannot safely do that around your family and close friends, I feel terrible for you, and I encourage you to do some research on ways that you can approach that, because you can't be living your life for those people. Maybe there are, maybe you can go to therapy. Maybe you can do some online research on effective language when communicating or starting that conversation with family members who might not be, totally available or interested in having that conversation. And worst comes to worst, if you are so actively standing in your own identity that you are losing people that you deeply love because they can't vibe with your joy, they are not the only people in the world, and you just haven't found your tribe yet. But don't lose hope, and know that there are people who love you, and you will find them. You will attract them once you start standing in who you are. You'll find them.
That is so valuable. Oh my goodness. That made me feel so, oh my goodness. Thank you so much. I know that's
Of course.
such a valuable lesson for so many people. And it's so great that your journey is being shared with so many different people across the country. So thank you so much for having this conversation with me. You have
Of
some
course.
really awesome stuff happening this week. Do you want to talk
That's
about what's
right.
going on?
We are playing Central Park Summer Stage in New York City, which is bananas. That is one of those like pie in the sky gigs if you're a band from New York, and we're pulling out all the stops. We haven't been in New York, and we haven't played our hometown in New York in over a year, and we're about to go back on the road. So we won't be back in New York for a while. So we are pulling out all the stops at Summer Stage and very excited about it. Then we are headed literally the next morning off to Bonnaroo. And we're going to play a set at Bonnaroo. And we have a couple other festivals this summer, and then we'll be out on a fall world tour. We're going to hit a lot of states in the US and then some Europe. And yeah, and we're working on our debut album, we're working on our first full length album.
Thank you so much for having this conversation, for being here with WMSC. Once again, guys, this has been our conversation with Sammy Rae and me, Terry. You can catch us here again on 90.3 WMSC Upper Montclair, and we will see you soon. Happy Pride!
Happy Pride!